Kim, what's on your radar?
Well, this past Monday, the Department of Homeland Security released a bulletin titled Summary of Terrorism Threat to the U.S. Homeland. And what's in it is pretty shocking. It actually labels what is typically considered free speech as terrorism. So I want to go over this bulletin with you. So the bulletin starts off with, the United States remains in a heightened threat environment fueled by several factors, including an online environment filled with false or misleading narratives and conspiracy theories and other forms of dis, and malinformation, MDM, introduced and or amplified by foreign and domestic threat actors. Okay, so first of all, remember, this is a bulletin about domestic terrorist threats to the homeland. And they're saying that we're in a heightened threat environment because of what they label MDM, dis, and malinformation, which they're saying could be spread by American citizens. So that's you and me. And if we spread what they label MDM, we could be in hot terrorism water. And when you click on it, you get their definition of what each one is. It says misinformation is false but not created or shared with the intent of causing harm. Malinformation is based on fact but used out of context to mislead, harm, or manipulate. Disinformation is deliberately created to mislead, harm, or manipulate a person, social group, organization, or country. Now, the problem with MDM being labeled as potential terrorist threats is that the definitions of dis, and malinformation keep changing. We've seen this throughout the pandemic, that many people who've been labeled as spreading misinformation or conspiracy theories have been, in fact, right all along. It was a conspiracy theory that there would be vaccine mandates. It was misinformation to say that the vaccine doesn't prevent spread. The Department of Homeland Security say people who spread MDM are possibly threat actors seeking to exacerbate societal friction to sow discord and undermine public trust in government institutions to encourage unrest, which could potentially inspire acts of violence. So they're saying if you sow discord and undermine public trust in a government institution like the CDC, FDA, the Pentagon, or Congress, that could lead to violence, which could happen to, let's say, during a protest. To prevent this, you could be labeled a terrorist threat if you're found to be engaging in speech that undermines a government institution that could lead to any of these acts. So if they think your words might lead to a protest against the government, and that protest might then lead to a violent breakout, which could happen at any protest, you could be labeled domestic terrorist simply for dissenting. By issuing this bulletin, they've effectively given themselves the freedom to halt any dissent they don't like under the guise of it could lead to violence. They're saying it's a domestic terrorist threat and we can't have that. And I think many of us warned this was on the horizon when politicians and others in the media were calling for more to be done against misinformation. I think some of us were mocked for saying the definition of terrorism is changing and the end result will be our own government going after anyone and everyone they deem to be morally inferior. Yet here we are. The bulletin goes on to say, the convergence of the following factors has increased the volatility, unpredictability, and complexity of the threat environment. The proliferation of false or misleading narratives, which sow discord or undermine public trust in U.S. government institutions. Again, you're putting yourself in the crosshairs if you sow discord or undermine public trust in government institutions. Don't talk bad about the government. It goes on to say, the primary terrorism-related threat to the United States continues to stem from lone offenders or small cells of individuals who are motivated by a range of foreign and or domestic grievances, often cultivated through the consumption of certain online content. So they're saying it could just be you. You don't need to be affiliated with a known neo-Nazi group or some other flagged organization. If you, acting alone, air grievances against the government that they deem to be potentially threatening, you could be flagged as a domestic terrorist. The bulletin continues, for example, there is widespread online proliferation of false or misleading narratives regarding unsubstantiated widespread election fraud and COVID-19 grievances associated with these themes, inspired violent extremist attacks during 2021. COVID-19 mitigation measures, particularly COVID-19 vaccine and mask mandates, have been used by domestic violent extremists to justify violence since 2020 and could continue to inspire these extremists to target government healthcare and academic institutions that they associate with those measures. Now, I understand that they're talking probably about January 6th, but besides angry parents at school board meetings and angry airline passengers, I don't remember there being any violent extremist attacks due to COVID. Unless they're talking about the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot, which has been exposed to be mostly planned by the FBI. Of course, it goes on to say, malign foreign powers have and continue to amplify these false or misleading narratives in efforts to damage the United States. So you see, all of this dis, and malinformation is really being supported and spread by probably Russia. So if you're an angry American spreading COVID disinformation online, you're most likely a Russian asset. And that makes you dangerous to our national security. Lastly, and what needs to be pointed out, is it goes on to say, DHS is working with public and private sector partners, as well as foreign counterparts, to identify and evaluate MDM, including false or misleading narratives and conspiracy theories spread on social media and other online platforms that endorse or could inspire violence. Now, what gets me here is the Department of Homeland Security is saying they are working with not only the public sector, but the private sector as well. So that leads me to believe that they're working with big tech companies to censor whatever information they determine to be misinformation or conspiracy theories. Now, who gets to decide on this? Ryan and Robbie, they say that they're going to be, working with the private sector and the public sector in stopping the spread of misinformation. Who are they to decide? They don't have exactly the best track record on deciding what is dis, or conspiracy theory information. Yet, this bulletin is pretty, I think, alarming that they've released on Monday quite quietly, basically saying that speech, dissent from the government, sowing any sort of discord amongst any sort of against a government institution is potentially domestic terrorism.
Yeah, I think that the Homeland Security Department was a mistake.
Yeah, I was just going to say we should. I have the answer. Shut it down.
Yeah,
disband it. Fire everyone who works for it.
They probably they probably don't like the abolish ICE language. They probably think that's misinformation. They should add to that alternative information as something that they condemn, so that they can then make it MDMA, and we can all at least chuckle at this bureaucratic creeping fascism that they're pushing.
DHS very high on list of government agencies I will eliminate.
Yeah.
Very high indeed.
They said that they even created, when you read the entire bulletin, most of it was on dis, and malinformation, but they did add in things that were genuine domestic terrorist threats. They would talk about violent attacks against synagogues or churches or other places, but that was kind of intermixed in between. Most of it was about dis, and malinformation, and then they'd put in real threats, real domestic threats that I think any of us would consider a problem. Anybody that's calling for violence. But they classified all of the, and then they also said, oh, and by the way, we created a separate branch too, just so you know, to specifically go after these types of domestic terrorist threats.
Yeah.
And that's on top of the Department of Justice also creating, quietly last month, I think it was January 11th, they released this notice saying that they had created their own also Department of, to go after domestic terrorists. So we're seeing these new branches, and it's all targeting misinformation.
I bet there are going to be a lot more kidnapping plots against Democratic governors. They're just going to multiply, so we find out that the FBI is the ones behind them. Look, law enforcement has every mandate it needs to pursue criminals, to stop and arrest people for violent plots, for engaging in violence. The whole domestic terrorism framing is very prone to abuse and not necessary outside maybe the category of actual sort of terrorist attacks being planned inside the country that are actually linked to foreign group like ISIS or something. But even those were always deranged people who want to do something because they're interested in ISIS, but not that ISIS actually had any formal connection or It's copycat type things. So it's really not a useful label. And more than not being a useful label, it's one that now the government wants to apply to anyone who is critical of the government or things that it says right, left, etc. So very concerning.
There's enough crime for the FBI to try to go after without trying to invent stuff and start editing people's posts.
Yeah.
Once they've cracked down on financial crime, then they should come back and talk to us. There's an entire Wall Street crime spree underway. Go deal with that, solve that. Then we'll talk about expanding your mandate to Twitter posts.
Yeah. Maybe if those Wall Street criminals are unmasked and unvaccinated, then they'll really want.
No, they're vaccinated.
Yeah, then they'll go after them. Well, and also one thing in the bulletin, I was looking for, as they were bringing up examples of like COVID misinformation and election fraud. And then they also brought up, of course, the actual violent attacks against synagogues and whatnot. I was looking in the bulletin for any sort of example the other way. Like they could say, the taking over, the occupying of downtown Seattle, or, any sort of the violence that happened during the BLM protests. And they didn't mention any of that. I mean, this was clearly a one-sided going after one political way of thinking, and that, is pretty frightening, I think.
Right, but don't worry, they'll go after BLM, they'll go after Antifa,
yeah.
they'll go after anybody who is
once it's set up, right? Then any administration could use this to their advantage, to their political advantage at any point in time. And that is what's so scary about this. That's why we have to be against this, because even if you don't like this malinformation that's out there and you agree that it is dis and malinformation, one day it'll be you, right? That's how it always goes.
Yeah.
Right, and either party will come after you, because if it's Democrats and they want to go after the Proud Boys or whoever, let's say they're not Proud Boys for thought crimes, not like if they commit actual crimes, go get them.
Right.
If they go after them, then they feel like they have to balance it, so they go after some people who are considered to be on the left. If it's the Republicans who want to go after Antifa, want to go after some Black Lives Matter protesters who might have looted something, then they'll also go after somebody on the right.
Yeah.
Just to throw a bone and say, look, so both parties are coming for you. If you embrace this type of domestic war on terror rhetoric.
Don't embrace it. Shut it down, the department.
Right.
All right, we'll have more Rising right after this. Stay with us.